Thank you for this opportunity we have to come together as a family, a church family. Thank you for the chance to study your word. Boy, I tell you, there's a lot packed into what seems like a little bit every time we focus in on it. How many people miss all that? You feel sorry. We pray that you'll bless us as we study tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, you know, it just comes across to me, the church family thing. It's these meetings where it really comes across that we're a church family, you know. If you're just hit and run in church, you never develop that family togetherness. It's hard to be picking on folks that you've been praying with and praying for and loving and seeing every week, you know. And those who don't do that, they miss out on that. And I'm thankful for it. Jerry, that was a good little start you had tonight there with the article. Boy, I mean, I've been just noticing that. I catch a lot of snippets of all these so-called patriot wags and wisdom people, you know, their blogs and their stuff. And I'm just exploding how all of a sudden they're all talking about being a Christian and how, you know, it's good against evil, and Trump is now selling Bibles to raise money for his campaign, and you know, something about that seems a little odd. I guess if you have to sell something, that's a good thing to sell if people will read them, but they'll probably just keep them wrapped up as a souvenir, you know. Yeah, in 30 years I can sell this for 10 times what I paid for it, or, you know. But anyway. It's getting serious out there. It's getting serious. And the interesting thing I'm noticing is all of the high-profile front conservatives are Catholics. Almost every single one. And the few that aren't are interviewing bishops and priests and all this stuff that's promoting the conservative. Anyway, I just couldn't resist because Holly and I have been reading the Two Republics by A.T. Jones. And I'm listening to, right now where I am, the Roman Empire is just converting into being a Christian empire. And if Christians nowadays would go and read what they went through to convert, all the monkey business, you know, basically what happened is the Roman Empire got so sick and tired of all of these bishops fighting with each other, and they were killing each other worse than the Romans were killing each other to fight over, you know, who's going to be emperor and who's not. And essentially the Roman Empire just got so sick of the Christians fighting, they said, take the empire and get out of our hair. Yeah, it was amazing. All the bishops, you know, the one in Rome, the one in Constantinople, and one in this was Alexandria. Those were the three main ones. They were, you know, trying to get the emperors to kill the other one and this one and that one, and the emperors were just pulling their hair out, trying to figure out what to do. But anyway, it's so much like what's happening now or it's gonna happen now. It's amazing. Jerry, you got something?
Yeah, a little tidbit I found out yesterday. I've always been wondering why the calendar got changed from Gregorian to what we have today. And it all happened on April 1st. It was when the new calendar got put into place, which made it January 1st for the new year. Gregorian was April 1st, was the new year, clear around the world. And then they changed it. And then what got out amongst the people, could be a Jesuit-driven thing, really sounds like to me, was if you did not accept the change and you celebrated the new year on April 1st, you're a fool. And that's where April Fool's Day started because of the calendar change.
Good one. I didn't know that. That's good. Okay. Well, shall we get into Hosea 9? Hosea 9. Boy, oh boy. I tell you, it's interesting to see after you get out of, when you get into Isaiah and Jeremiah and all that, the whole Bible is pretty much stories, and then the Psalms and Proverbs and, some interesting things and positive things. And, man, from now on in the Old Testament, it's just God just having heartaches, nonstop heartaches, pleading with his people. And it gets painful to follow along with, for me. I always feel kind of bad, but then when we dig in deeper, we can see more things that are helpful to us. So let's jump into Hosea 9, verse 1. And June, would you like to start us off? Verse 1?
Just one, okay. It says, "Rejoice not, O Israel, for joy, as other people, for thou hast gone a whoring from thy God. Thou hast loved a reward upon every corn floor."
What in the world is he talking about there?
I had trouble trying to understand most of this. Listening to what you got out of it, I guess.
I had to dig deep to work on these. I can tell you that the word reward stands for buying a whore, paying for a whore, or being paid for as a whore. And corn floor represents a barn, a wide open floor in a barn. So, the threshing floor is outside. The threshing floor is outside where the wind carries away chaff, but in the barn is a corn floor. So what I got out of that, and if anybody got something different, say, I got out of that these people were spending their time with wasteful things, destructive things, pagan things. They were going a whoring instead of following God and living uprightly. Tammy has a...
I read the reference to Jeremiah 44:17.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what I
That's
got
it,
down, so
right?
go for it.
"But we will certainly do whatsoever thing goeth forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the Queen of heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings and our princes, in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem, for then had we plenty of victuals, and were well, and saw no evil." I'm going to do whatever I feel.
There you go. Very good. Very good.
There's a verse that, whenever you speak of whoredom in the Bible, this one comes to mind. It's Jeremiah 3:3, and yeah, it's again talking about harlotry, and the last part of it says, "And thou hadst a whore's forehead; thou refusest to be ashamed." So you think of the proud face, and like God is saying, don't rejoice in your whoredom. Don't be so proud and haughty and you know. What? Yeah, exactly.
Well, and if you look at it from the standpoint of receiving money for whoredom, it says they loved a reward, and the reason for their joy was they were joyful for the rewards of the harvest. Now, is that a bad thing? That they thankful for the harvest?
Not bad at all.
Who were they thankful to? Who were they thankful to for their harvest?
Themselves.
It wasn't God. It was
false fertility God that they were actually working with for this increase of their harvest.
That's right. Very good.
I'll read from Matthew Henry's commentary because it helped me considerably. This says, Israel gave rewards to their idols in the offerings presented to them. It is common for those who are niggardly in religion to be prodigal upon their lusts. Those are reckoned as adulterers who love a reward in the cornflower better than a reward in the favor of God and in eternal life. Full of joy of harvest, have no disposition to mourn for sin.
So isn't that interesting? The whoredom is on the corn floor, which is an analogy to the harvest coming in and filling the barns up. So many amazing images and symbology and going on there. All right, let's go to verse 2. Who's next in line? Holly, yours.
Yeah, here's the reality check. The floor, this corn floor, I guess, the floor and the winepress shall not feed them, and the new wine shall fail in her. It's part of why God's saying, don't be so excited. You're about to fail here.
If you're interested, little details here, the wine press has 2 stages. It has a large vat where they stomped the grapes, mashed them, and this drained off into her lower vat where the juice went, and the pulp that was left evidently was used for food. And of course the grape, the juice on the bottom vat would be used for wine, new wine. Well, this is kind of saying that the pulp is going to be bad. It's going to end up bad, and so is the wine. It's going to turn bad on you before you can get it drinking, whatever. And he's telling them that you're not going to enjoy this harvest because, you know why? You're going to be carried away into captivity. You're going to be gone because you have committed all this whoredom. You're a goner. You were not working in the Lord's winepress. You were not taking care of business. Any other thoughts? June has a thought.
It says in Jeremiah 3:3 that she read that the showers have been withholden, there hath been no latter rain. Well, that could be some spiritual implications. But I'm thinking back in that day, they could have said, well, that's climate change. Instead of saying this is the curse of God because he's trying to get your attention.
There you go. There you go. Well, they had to make some excuse because, Baal was supposed to be the one providing all this rain. And, of course, when he didn't do it, it made him look bad. Kenny?
Yeah, the wine, we know that is also doctrine. So this,
Yes.
whatever this new doctrine is that's floating around in their midst is not going to serve them well in the future.
It's that same goblet of wine that church later on down the line the woman was holding, isn't it?
Mingled with the blood of the saints.
It's all paganism. And the Israelites had a habit of mixing in God's religion with the pagan religion. I think maybe it just made their conscience feel a little better about what they were doing, but they would bring, mix the temple stuff together a lot of times too. So, all right, verse 3. Jeff's got it.
They shall not dwell in the Lord's land, but Ephraim shall return to Egypt, and they shall eat unclean things in Assyria.
Well, Jeff, what are you getting out of that?
Well, they're not going to be in the Lord's land.
Use your mic.
Oh, they're not going to be in the Lord's land. They're getting driven from their land, maybe.
Well, they're going to eat unclean things. When you're a captive, and especially in Assyria, do you get to order your meals? Do you get to say, well, today I think I'll have T-bone steak and a little asparagus and a salad on the side? You're going to get what they feed you, and it's going to be unclean meats. Tammy has a... And they're also stuck with unclean religion. This verse is referring to that. It's pagan religion is unclean, like the food you're going to end up eating. Go ahead, Tammy.
No, actually, Ephraim, what these people were doing was making a covenant with Assyria
Yes.
by their choices.
That's right.
And Hosea 7:11 says, Ephraim also is like a silly dove without heart. They call to Egypt, they go to Assyria.
Remember that verse from a little while back? A silly dove. Isn't that a picture? All right, let's do verse 4, Lisa.
9:4. They shall not offer wine offerings to the Lord, neither shall they be pleasing unto him. Their sacrifices shall be unto them as the bread of mourners. All that eat thereof shall be polluted. For their bread for their soul shall not come into the house of the Lord. As I'm reading this, and I have to go back pretty regularly because I'm kind of thick-headed, I go back to the very beginning of Hosea and the theme. And I have to because I think, gosh, why don't I make any sense of this? And then as I did again, reviewing this one, I think that all of these writings in Hosea are warnings, not threats, statements of fact showing that punishment inevitably follows sin. And through all of his writings, Hosea depicts the yearning love of God for his wayward people. So obviously, the people are wayward. They won't be nourished. They won't let themselves be nourished because they're following false gods or idols, worshiping. They're taking their strength and their pleasures from sinful things, from ungodly things.
Very good. What is it talking about mourners? Should be unto them as the bread of mourners. What is the bread of mourners like? Tasteless. Well, I'll give you a little historical background. When somebody died, the body would be held in the house for 7 days as they, like a, what do they call it now? A wake. And it would be in the house for 7 days, and the mourners would be in there. Well, traditionally, when they're going through mourning and there is a dead body in the house will be unclean during that 7-day period, and the food in that house will be unclean. So you will not be, what should I say, you're not appropriate to go into the house of the Lord. You are unclean. You're ritually unclean. And so what is God telling us about that then?
Don't come and worship me with this dead body in your heart, basically.
So that dead religion that you've been taking into your body, stay out of my house. We don't want it in there.
If I could get to Haggai 2, we've heard a great sermon on this a couple of times by Pastor Philip Sizemore, but Haggai 2 is another place where it's stated, and he's talking about the law. In verse 12 to 14, ask the priests, if you have holy flesh, something that's holy sacrifice or something, and you're carrying it, and if you touch bread or pottage or anything, will it be holy? And the priest said no. They can't make anything holy. And then in verse 13, Haggai said, well, if one that's unclean by a dead body, like Skip said, touch any of these things, if you touch bread, etc., will it be unclean? And they said yes. So he said in verse 14, so is this people, and so is this nation before me, saith the Lord, and so is every work of their hands, and that which they offer there is unclean. Basically, if we're unclean, if our life is unclean, everything we touch, we make it unclean. And that's why Hosea is saying, everyone who eats, of their sacrifice or participates in it is polluted, because their life is polluted, and so they can't make anybody holy by the way that they're supposedly worshiping God.
Very good. Very good. That is, well, I'm going to go back to what Lisa said. We need to remember as we're going through Hosea, the first 3 chapters. I let myself keep forgetting that, but the first three chapters don't seem to have anything. I mean, it's a narrative of a story of Hosea and Gomer and his kids, and then all of a sudden we're lapsing off into all of this stuff about Israel. Well, that was the whole reason God did that with Hosea, was here's an example of what I'm going to tell you from now on for Israel. And this is for Israel to look at. So as we look at these verses, we have to keep going back in our minds that it's following that narrative.
As I tried to think about that then, and I looked again at the introduction in my Bible, and I keep in mind Hosea was a minor prophet. So Hosea isn't the bad guy in all of this. He's telling the story that is to be our lesson, and in form of parable.
Well, and you realize when we say minor prophets, it doesn't mean they're lesser prophets. It means they just have shorter books, shorter in influence in history. Yeah. I'll read verse 5. What will you do in the solemn day and in the day of the feast of the Lord? We've just been talking about the fact that he's warning them they're going to get taken into captivity, right? So he's saying, what are you going to do when those days, those feasts, those ceremony days come along that I've asked you to keep, and you're in captivity where you aren't going to be able to keep those. What are you going to do? Are you going to be longing for those days again? Or are you going to assimilate into this captivity? All right, Mary, are you ready for verse 6?
Verse 6, for lo, they are gone because of destruction. Egypt shall gather them up. Memphis shall bury them. The pleasant places for their silver, nettles shall possess them. Thorns shall be in their tabernacles. So it sounds like that no matter what happens, all the good places are going to have problems now.
Well, with nobody home, tabernacles is the actual translation is houses. So it's talking about their houses in their homeland. With nobody home, all of this land that who gave them? God gave them this land special. All of this land that he gave them and the blessings. So they had these houses and vineyards and fields covered with nettles.
Is it talking about Palestine or God's land?
He's talking about their home that they're going to be taken away from.
He's talking about you had to leave God's land.
That's right.
So I just figured it was Palestine, it was Palestine.
Yes, correct. Go ahead.
Yeah, we had that same story back when Babylon fell. God said it will not be inhabited again, and the wilderness moved in on it. The animals and plants and all that. If you're not there to clean your yard, everything can come in, and that's what's going to happen here to Israel on all that area.
Nobody has ever inhabited Babylon again, have they? It's been uninhabited. Now, Saddam tried to rebuild a little bit of it, and that's fine, but nobody lives in it. It's just a few blocks put back together, sitting there with scorpions and mice playing around, and that's it. All right, Tammy, are you ready for verse 7?
Yes. Hosea 9:7. The days of visitation are come, the days of recompense are come. Israel shall know it. The prophet is a fool. The spiritual man is mad for the multitude of thine iniquity and the great hatred. And Prophets and Kings had a little bit to say about this.
Good.
Prophets and Kings 2:85 basically said that God had borne with Israel. He was long-suffering with them, right?
Yes.
And now he's tired of it. And so it's time to reap the apostasy that they sowed. God didn't do it. They sowed the apostasy.
Yes. It was, he always gives us free choice, doesn't he?
Yes.
And when things go wrong, we love to blame him, don't we? We love to
Yes.
blame God, but it's
One more.
nobody's fault but ours.
Okay? Because Hosea 8:4 told us, they have set up kings, but not by me. They have made princes, and I knew it not. Of their silver and their gold have they made them idols, that they may be cut off. Again, here's God trying to give them chance after chance for how many centuries? And it's like, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's like today, I'm not God, but it's like people think they've got all kinds of time, and no, that's not going to happen in my lifetime. I can go ahead and sin today, and I'll worry about it tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's a bit perplexing. Sorry, I got excited.
Well, it's human nature. It's human nature. And if we don't take on God's nature, we do that over and over, don't we? Kenny has a thought.
Yeah, that verse that she just quoted, the verse she just quoted that said, they have set up their kings. But I thought it was God that sets up kings and takes down kings. So this is a very interesting dynamic change, that when we separate ourselves from God so far that He'll let you choose your own kings, and He's not really in charge of really setting them up. So that brings us to today, where they're calling for King Drumpf. You ought to look up what his real name was before he became Trump. It was Drumpf, German. His family's Nazi. So anyway, it's just interesting to see these parallels. As we're reading these things, I'm looking at it from my eye today and seeing these things play out right in front of us.
Let's look in verse 7 there, without zipping by there. It says the days of visitation are coming. The visitation is speaking of God. That refers to God doing a judgment. And the reason that He's going to do a judgment is they had been scoffing at the fact that one day He was going to be, His wrath would come. One day that wrath would come, and they've been scoffing at that. And then we come to the prophet is a fool, the spiritual man is mad. Well, are God's prophets fools? The Bible can really flip persons in grammar, can't it? Back and forth, and you have to watch the context. The prophets are the false prophets, or people mocking God's prophets. It can go both ways, and it went both ways. Holly has a comment.
Could it also be that because of their twistedness that they can see a real prophet as a fool as well?
That they had a real prophet.
Well, who's talking to them? I mean, Hosea himself, being a prophet,
Yes.
would have been seen as a fool.
Yes. Well,
Because
sure.
of what was happening to him in his typology.
Exactly.
That's kind of my point. God flips it both directions.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You know, there's got to be people saying, look at this guy marrying this whore over and over, and those kids aren't even his, and oh my, how could he know anything? Holly.
I think Paul in 1 Corinthians, first couple chapters, talks about how God flips wisdom and foolishness, and so the foolish things according to the world are actually wiser, and the so-called wise things of the world are actually foolish, and spiritual things, can't be discerned by worldly wisdom, but you have to have the foolishness of preaching to actually show you. So maybe that fits in
That's
here.
exactly what's going on there, isn't it?
Also, the definition of a fool, a literal fool, there's two verses in the Psalms, Psalm 14:1, Psalm 53:1. It says, the fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. And it goes on to describe they're corrupt, they're full of abominable works. You say that the righteous man is the fool, but you're the fool because you're factoring out God and His judgments, which this verse is about, the visitation or the judgment, the recompense of God.
Well, the fact that this verse ends in the great hatred would let us know that they're referring to the people mocking God's prophet. So, all right, verse 8. Are you ready, Jerry?
The watchman of Ephraim was with my God, but the prophet is the snare of a fowler in all his ways, and hatred in the house of his God.
Jerry, what's the watchman?
Is that the prophet?
That's the good prophet, wasn't it? Yeah. The watchman was the good prophet, and he was the one that they mocked. All right, let's look at verse. Anybody else have a thought on that? Verse 9.
Okay, verse 9. They are deeply corrupted as in the days of Geba. He will remember their iniquity, and he will punish their sins.
Oh, boy.
There's a note here in my Bible that says the tribe of Benjamin was responsible for a civil war that's stemmed from an event at Geba, and that's in Judges 19, chapter 19 and 20, 2 chapters.
Good.
And it's very similar to what Lot, the angels came to Lot. You need to read that. It's really interesting.
It's a very amazingly similar story, wasn't it? I'll fill you guys in on that. It's you remember? This is a little story that not a lot of, what should I say, airtime is given to it. It sounds like Bob said, it sounds like the story of Lot and Sodom. A prophet had a concubine. How that works, I'm not sure, but in those days, anyway, they abused her. They came and took her and abused her, the people of that town, and they were the tribe of Benjamin. And it's a yucky story, but you can read it in Judges 19 and 20 if you want to. What?
I think that lady died.
Oh, yes, she died, and I won't tell you what happened after that. That's the gory part.
Yeah, I started reading that and I couldn't quit. I just
Yeah, it's very graphic. It just says God is going to remember their iniquity, just as the sin of Gibeah was bloodily avenged by the near annihilation of the tribe of Benjamin. And God wreaked vengeance on them for what they did. And although for a time it seemed that God had overlooked the sinner's guilt and permitted Benjamin to be victorious over the other tribes, so it will be with this northern kingdom we're referring to here in Hosea. They will not escape the divine visitation of wrath in their exile, though for many years it would seem that their transgressions had been overlooked by God. Forgive me for writing all this down and reading it, but I didn't want to forget some of the details on that. Any other thoughts on this verse? Oh, Holly?
I had printed this out a few weeks ago for another chapter, but on verse 9 specifically, Ellen White writes, actually a paragraph above, all kinds of flagrant injustice, unwanted luxury, extravagance, shameless feasting, drunkenness, the gross licentiousness and debauchery of their age. The prophets basically protested in vain. And then she says, such were some of the results that had followed the setting up of the 2 calves of gold by Jeroboam, which we talked about before. And eventually she said, the first departure from God's forms of worship had led to the introduction of grosser forms of idolatry until finally nearly all the inhabitants of the land had given themselves over to the alluring practices of nature worship. Forgetting their maker, Israel deeply corrupted themselves. In this story of Gibeah and Sodom and all that, there's no boundary. And just like it says in Romans 1, I forget the verse, worshiping, the creature above the creator.
Okay, let's go to verse 10. Janine?
I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first fruits on the fig tree in its first season. But they went to Baal Peor, and they separated themselves to that shame. They became an abomination like the thing they loved. He was saying that
Don't be fighting now.
Look at something there, but he's found something, but he won't read it. But it sounds like to me he was really rejoicing at first, you know, when Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, he rejoiced over them. It was like finding grapes in a desert. And he saw their loyalty to them, and they were like seeing the first fruits on a lovely fig tree. But when they went to the worshiping those Baal and those idols, it was very shameful, and the Lord he wasn't joyful anymore. It was I'm sure it was disgusting to him.
Jesus is talking, do you think that he's referring to how he finally got to get his people separated and headed towards the land he promised them as they came out of Egypt and went into the wilderness? And he's saying, it's like who would guess you'd be in the middle of the desert and there would be some juicy grapes? Fat, juicy grapes, and that's what you were like to me. I was so excited. I was so thrilled to take you out there and find you. You're like the first fruit, when we wait all winter long for fruit to develop on our trees, that first stripe is first ripe fruit. And sweet. It was sweet in his mouth. He had his children, even though they were stinkers, just like with human beings. We love our kids, even though they're stinkers. Sometimes he loved them. But then, what's he talking about? Baal Peor. That's where Balaam did his little curses that got flipped the wrong direction. And the Moabites sent whores into the tents of the Israelites, and the Israelites took them in and contaminated themselves with them and began worshiping their gods and went to a festival with them to worship Baal and Ashtaroth. So it's speaking of it says, separated themselves unto that shame. So it's contrasting the Nazarites separated themselves to be holy. And here these Israelites were separating themselves to Baal. Right at the border of the promised land. Thank you for bringing that up. That God had to be so frustrated. This would be the second time that they're messing around when he's ready to give them the land. All right, let's do, Cheryl, have you got 11 and 12? We'll do 2 verses on this one.
For Ephraim, their glory shall fly away like a bird, from the birth and from the womb and from the conception. Though they bring up their children, yet will I bereave them, that there shall not be a man left. Yea, woe also to them when I depart from them.
Wow. What's happening there, Kenny? Do you have anything, Cheryl?
The title there on this Bible says the fertility worshipers will become infertile.
Do you think that could have anything to do with the fact that when people are sexually promiscuous, oftentimes they get physical problems that keeps them from being fertile? I wonder if that isn't somewhat referencing it. Kenny, then Lisa, then Holly.
If I remember right, the Moabite god, they were also sacrificing their babies into this
Yes,
fire-bellied god.
right.
And so you're going to murder your children, I'll fix that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and they were doing it in the name of fertility, which is very interesting. It was kind of like you're going to have babies to destroy them, but we, in our modern age, the abortion worship now is basically the new
Same thing.
Moabite god. Yeah,
Same thing.
we're not any different. I mean, nothing has changed.
And it wasn't God destroying their offspring, was it? It was their behavior and their lifestyles and what they were doing and their worship of this murderous God. Lisa.
I was struck by the fact, the order at the end.
Uh-oh.
Did lose me? There we are. And that is, and from the womb, from the birth, from the womb, from the conception. Obviously, conception, then womb, then birth is the proper order. Yes, it's backwards. Yeah, I thought that odd. But I wanted to share, and I have this awesome little Bible dictionary, and I'm reading about Baal, and I will say quickly. It says, the chief Canaanite god who, as the god of rain, was thought to provide fertility for crops and livestock. Baal worship was associated with immorality, reference here Hosea 9:10, and child sacrifice, Jeremiah 19:5. Pagan rituals considered especially offensive to the one true God of the Israelites. During their history, Hebrew people often committed adultery by worshiping this god of their Canaanite neighbors. Prophet Elijah denounced the prophet of Baal. God of Israel won a divisive victory over this pagan god on Mount Carmel. But certainly, as that discussion has been, he was considered a god of rain or god of fertility, but his followers practiced child sacrifice.
And the Bible
Just-
often will follow something backwards like that. You have children, you have birth, you have conception, and what's going through my mind is I wonder if they had some form of abortion too, because God when the Israelites were in the desert and God was giving the Mosaic laws, he referenced abortion, that you were not to abort babies. Holly.
I see this whole chapter as an especially strong pun on the name Ephraim, which means double fruit or twofold increase, or that brings fruit, or that grows. So when he uses the name Ephraim, he's saying you that are supposed to be twice fruitful, you're going to be the opposite. You're going to be not fruitful at all. Whatever you have, I'm going to take it right back away. He's just telling them you're the opposite of your intention. You're the opposite of your name. Good. And the Baal Peor reference, that was the situation, like Skip said, after Balaam had been hired to curse Israel, and God changed it into a blessing. And the blessing was, you won't be able to count them. They'll just be uncountable, innumerable growth. And now God's saying, basically, because of what you did, you reversed all those blessings that I intended for you. You'll be so small that you'll be, what do they say, you can count them on one hand or something. So everything God wanted to give them is lost and flipped.
That's good that you brought that up. It flipped the whole blessing. They flipped it themselves, that whole blessing. So Kenny, are you next on do 13 and 14?
Right, Hosea 9:13 and 14. Ephraim again, as I saw Tyrus, which I clicked on, it's something to do with a rock.
Yes, Tyrus means rock. It
Yeah.
also could be referring to Tyre, which was
Right.
a very beautiful place in those days.
Is planted in a pleasant place, but Ephraim shall bring forth his children to the murder.
There you go.
Give them, O Lord, what wilt thou give? Give them a miscarrying womb and dry breasts. No milk.
When nation is taken captive, especially some like the Assyrians were known as some of the most vicious people on earth at that time. They did just the most gory things. They weren't just satisfied with killing people in battles and stuff. They had to just defile them in every possible way. And when you are taken into captivity in situations like that, am I dying? Okay. Then there's not a whole lot of chance that there's going to be a whole lot of procreation going on, a whole lot of children born, the nation prospering. The captors are not going to want you flourishing like happened in Egypt. That's what got the pharaohs all spazzed out was, wow, those guys are, we better slow this down. Okay, Celia, how about verse 15? That's a good one.
Verse 15. Because of all their wickedness in Gilgal, I hated them there. Because of their sinful deeds, I will drive them out of my house. I will no longer love them. All their leaders are rebellious.
Oh boy. Cecilia, did you find any? I'm glad you and Zane are here tonight. It's good to have you. Hi, Zane.
But I've been thinking, the references to Egypt and these constant back to Egypt and punishment. I was watching the documentary on Netflix, Moses, and I was thinking about the part where God was so mad that he said he wanted to destroy the people and start over with Moses.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking of all these punishments, and the alternative was to destroy them because he was so angry with them. And these punishments are bad, but at least he's still pursuing them, and it's a warning. Like when I tell Zane, stop or I'm going to spank you, and he keeps going, and he keeps going.
Uh-oh.
and the punishments just increase. And that's what I'm thinking of with this chapter. It's I can't imagine God's anger and trying to keep calling them and warning and these constant threats and punishments. But
do you think he was really wanting to destroy all the Israelites in that story of Egypt? Or do you think that he was testing Moses' will and love for those people to see if he had that same amount of drive and love to stick with them through all of those trials? I don't see God wishing that he could just wipe them all out. I was gonna, Kenny.
All he's got to do is wish and it happens. I mean,
Yeah,
so I mean,
exactly.
I wouldn't imagine that he would even want to think about such a thing because he could, yeah.
From the word of the Lord.
Yeah.
I'll parse down this verse if you're interested. Gilgal is the first site of an Israelite camp west of the Jordan, east of Jericho. And there's where Samuel was made judge, and Saul was made a king later. And later after that, it went from all these wonderful things that God took them through to illicit pagan worship of idols. And it became known for that. Is that a sad fact when it had that wonderful history up to that point and then they turned it into a pagan cesspool? It was a dwelling place of the prophets in northern Israel for about 4 miles from Shiloh and Bethel. It is a region conquered by Joshua. The site at that time, it was a little bit different place and they're not sure where it was. where it says God hated them, he hates the sin, not the sinner. If sinners cross the line and become sin, then there's no separation between the sin and the sinner. This was a sobering thought to me, is at some point, we, as a sinner, become sin itself. Think about that. If we are so dead set on continuing in our sin, we become sin itself. And that's when God sees a hardened heart. Mine house, God, of course, is speaking of Palestine and the land God gave them. He loved the few individuals who remained faithful. The princes show where it says, the princes are revolters. This is showing how complete the apostasy was when the leaders and the kings and the princes go bad in a nation. What happens? They always follow. All right, we've got 2 more verses and a couple more minutes. So, verse 16.
Ephraim is smitten, their root is dried up. They shall bear no fruit. Yea, though they bring forth, yet will I slay even the beloved fruit of their wombs.
When a root goes bad, what happens? A tree might still have leaves on it, right? But the fruit quits coming out. And then what happens when you're growing these trees as food? Are you going to let it suck nutrients out of the soil from the other trees? What do you have to do? It has to go. Lisa.
I often think of that, and I did as I read this, about when you have flowers that are blooming. You've heard of the expression deadheading. I always think deadheading, taking off any spent blooms, for example. I always think as I do that, power to the root. So I'm taking off what is the dead part, that it sends then power to feed and support the root system and not the dead flower.
Good. And, you do that with a lot of plants that are putting out a whole lot of leaves that you want fruit on. A lot of times you'll pick some of the lower ones off, and then the fruit grows better. Okay, go ahead, Lisa.
I had something else here that I was really struck by, and that is no famine is so dreadful as that of the soul. So, as you think of how the story is telling us about being, in essence, barren, taking away our opportunity to be good, productive Christian people. But we suffer famine when we don't follow God or don't follow God's law, and nothing more dreadful as famine of the soul.
Very good. Yes. All right, go ahead and read verse 17 while you've got the micro. Did you have something, June?
Okay. As long as you don't ask me a question about it following.
I'm not promising anything like that.
I believe you. Hosea 9:17. My God will cast them away because they did not hearken unto him, and they shall be wanderers among the nations. He obviously has said, and there's several Deuteronomy references in my margin, but he has cast them, sent them away, and they wander the nations. They aren't gathered together as a good, tight unit. I forgot my train of thought altogether.
Well, the Lord warned them in Deuteronomy 28, 63 and 65 that if they departed from him and didn't keep the covenant, that they would be wanderers. And the 10 tribes as a nation were never returned. They never returned, and they would be wanderers until the end of time. Is that true? Look at today. I was just reading the Two Empires book that when the Catholics took over, they kicked all the Jews out. They kicked all the Jews out of the countries and scattered them. And they've been scattered until today, haven't they? The ones in Israel now are very few, and they're not really all, they're Khazarian Jews, which are Turkish Jews. But Lisa, did you have one more?
Deuteronomy, reference Deuteronomy 28:64, and the Lord shall scatter thee among all people from the one end of the earth even unto the other. There thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone.
Thank you. You have one?
Yeah, so part of Balaam's prophecy that is now reversed, he said, they shall not be reckoned among the nations, they shall dwell alone. God designed for them to be a separate people, a light to the nations, a light of the gospel. But he's basically saying, you mixed yourself in with them, and you're just going to be mixed in with them. You're not going to be separate, because you aren't. You're amalgamated.
True. Yeah, it's and you know the really, and this isn't bashing on them or anything like that, but the really saddest thing to me is when I read this story of Jesus being crucified, and they're all saying, let his blood be on our head. Wow. I mean, that came back, didn't it? They asked for it. It's just like everything we do, God isn't doing stuff to us to be mean and hurt us. We're doing it to ourselves. When we put ourselves in Satan's hands, we end up with nothing but trouble. And that's how it goes. All right, let's close out. Does somebody have the mic, like to give the prayer? Miss Holly. Holly, do you got the mic?
Well, I set it down. I gave it away. Father in heaven, thank you for this chapter, and it is for us also sober reminder that evil does not go unchecked and unnoticed and unpunished. Please give us the nudge where we need to come back to obedience and joy in serving the true God. And we pray in his name, amen.
Well, did you see anything that you didn't expect you were going to see in this chapter? Boy, I did. I got a ton of stuff I never expected out of that. And I got to get this thing out of my head that it's not God just ranting angrily for no reason. It's very distinct messages to us, not just them. Yeah, five more chapters.